You have questions, we have answers. This is Jane Muller.
And this is Ken Muller. Welcome to our show, all about real estate with Ken and Jane. We are pleased to have back with us as our guest, Jena Kinney. She's a certified life coach. Jena, welcome back again.
Thank you for having me once again. It's great to be here.
Yes, it is. And we covered a lot, but the time went so fast. So we're so glad that you're coming back so we can continue talking about agreements, disagreements, and expectations and all that fun stuff.
Absolutely.
So let's do just a quick recap for any of our listeners that didn't catch the last Sunday's show. So if you could just briefly summarize what you do, and then we can get into it.
So I help people really just get into more leadership in their own lives, whatever that means, personal, professional, helping them get to where they want to go faster. And sometimes we slow down to get there faster, which seems kind of funny, but that's what we do. We really slow down to see their beliefs, see their perspectives, and really help shift that and help them move forward faster. And in regards to what we covered last time, we were talking about this distinction between agreements and expectations and how challenging it can be when we go out to the world with all of these expectations that often don't get met. And then we get frustrated and resentful, and how coming to the table around an agreement can be really helpful in terms of co-creating, having people come together, co-create that agreement, be able to find a way to move forward. You're going to test the strength of that agreement with one of those questions, like, is that something I can count on? Just like Jane was sharing in her example. And really coming together and working in a different way.
Right. And you said some of the challenges you face when you do your coaching, whether it be for personal or corporate settings, is a lot of people say, well, Jena, that's all great, but I don't have time to make the agreements. And it's the opposite. Everyone should think they don't have time not to make the agreements, because it's vital to have agreements for everything you do in life, whether it be your personal relationships. Like last week you covered that on the weekends. You and your husband often make agreements about how you're going to do your schedule, what events you're going to do. If you're you may want to do the gardening. He may want to watch the football game, and you're going to come to some bargain for. You're going to bargain it out and come to an agreement. It's not a written contract, but it's an understanding of, and so the expectations for him and you will be on the same page.
And Ken, that takes us like 2 minutes, right?
Right.
And it's a weekend of fighting if we don't.
I think I know who's going to win that if
with Ken and me, right? When it's a football season, and he makes sure he get agreement.
No, I make sure that if it's a certain team, if the Jets game is on, I said, no, I want to watch it this day at Sunday night, especially I want to watch that game, so you don't get the TV. It's fine.
And he will say, I asked him to do something. He said, I will do that, but this weekend is mine. I'm going to watch the game.
That's right. That's an agreement.
I had remote control, okay?
Now, Ken, what are you doing to make sure the agreement is solid?
Solid. Well, I mean, we pretty much agree, and then I have my daughter as a witness, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't get a witness. Well, I don't get it notarized and have her sign it up. But
remember, you can ask, is that something I can count on from you?
That's right. There you go.
Because she responds well to that. We've already learned.
That's right.
We've already learned.
Yes.
That's right.
But so far, I mean, I've been pretty good with him, because whatever Ken promised me he was going to do, he never, ever let me down.
That's right.
So if I agree with him...
Well, do I have a choice? Really?
but because I feel that's a trait, right? If he never let me down, what I agreed, I should honor that. So don't set up bad example.
That's right. And I think that's the really cool thing about agreements, right? If we can't come to the table and really agree something and really live into that, right? And there will be times when agreements aren't going to be met. We forget, something happens. That will happen. But when we come in good faith, that's when we are in relationship, and not just a marriage relationship, but an employee-employer relationship, right? If we can't trust that either one of us are going to do what we've agreed ever, then there is no relationship, right? There is nothing to base that relationship on, and therefore it's kind of futile. You probably shouldn't have that employee, or maybe you shouldn't have that marriage, so I think it's really interesting just to see that like little tiny distinction.
Yep.
And Jane, you said it right. It's like, hey, he always lives into the agreements that he makes with me. So I want to live into my agreements that I make with him.
Yes.
And again, that's another powerful part of this.
Yeah, that's respect for each other.
Yeah.
That is the respect. You don't have to go tell people how much you care about them, how much you love them. Your actions speak louder.
Right.
He keep his promise, I keep mine.
Yeah.
So that's called respect.
Really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's also talk about, let's say, when agreements are agreed to, but when there's disagreements about the agreements, because people may have still have different interpretations about the agreement, right? Because no matter how solid, how you try to solidify it, that's one of your test questions. You look at it and you say, is there anything that's ambiguous about this, right? But
absolutely.
But oftentimes, even in real life and contracts, that's why people go to court. They have lawsuits because they both have the same contract, but they have different interpretations of it, and that's why it's a whole industry, right? The whole lawyers, the courts, the judges. That's why we have a whole system in place for that.
Yeah. And here's the thing about when we make an agreement, and I want to go back to the example that I was using with my kids, where we agree their behavior and what's going to occur before we go into the shop. And so that takes 2 minutes, right? They've co-created it. I've allowed them to tell me what they want to do. Now, I have had times where they didn't fully live into the agreement that we made, right? And so I use this example because when we make agreements, it's really easy to go back and have a discussion about what occurred. When I have an expectation that they're going to behave well and do certain things, when it doesn't happen, it becomes kind of a parent-to-child conversation. You can kind of imagine me standing over my child, pointing my finger at them. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. When we co-create it, it's more of a parent-parent conversation, even though it's with my child. It elevates them in the conversation to have the maturity to really be with the conversation. So I might say to them, hey, we made an agreement that you weren't going to run in the shop, and you were running in the shop. What occurred? What happened? And then I give them the opportunity to speak up. And then what we do is we come back to then creating another agreement. Because Ken, you're right. Sometimes we don't get specific enough the first time. Or, he might have thought, well, I thought you meant in the back part of the shop not to run, not outside, right? And so we can just get more specific, and having that conversation allows that specificity. And then at the end of that, I'm like, okay, so can we agree now that you're not going to run in the shop, outside of the shop, you're not going to run in the parking lot, we're going to walk. Is that something we can agree?
Right.
How does that sound for you? Yes, I can agree that. Okay. Is that something I can count on? Yes. Right. So now we've gone back and renegotiated. And that's the point of agreements. Before we were talking about the seller wanting to sell their house at a higher price than what you think the market can bear. Well, when you come to an agreement, we're going to try it your way for 30 days. And if we're not seeing, we're going to come back to this table and agree a new price. Right. So at any time, you can renegotiate a new agreement. Let's say the seller is saying, we're not seeing enough movement. I can see that before that 30 days is up.
Right.
Let's come back to the table
sooner.
Agree a new price. Right.
Sure.
So the thing about agreements is you can constantly renegotiate them. If it's not working the way you want it to, or if it's, this kind of situation where, you can see something else needs to occur. If the agreement that you thought you made that was solid isn't solid enough, like the running in the shop. I have a story from my corporate days where I had reports that were due by a certain time. I thought I made really solid agreements that it would be turned in on time. Well, I got the report from one of my employees at 11:59 with a joke like, haha, I got it in on time because I said it was due on that day. Now, my report was due the next day. I had the expectation, and that is the proper word because I did not have an agreement just quite yet.
Okay.
I said it was due that day. I didn't say by what time.
Right.
Because now I need to take his report and use that for my report, which is due at 8 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. Okay.
So now that means I'm up at midnight
Yeah.
doing my stuff with that report, right? And so it gave me an opportunity to go back to that employee and say, hey, we need to renegotiate the agreement. The agreement is you're going to have it to me by 5 on these days.
Right.
Yes.
And that brings up a very interesting point in this digital day and age. I mean, with emails and especially with texts, it used to be that, before we had the cell phones, before you had the texts, that, people had the job from 9 to 5, 8 to 6 p.m. or whatever. They were at the office. When they left the office, there were no cell phones, no text messages. So now, but now it's a 24/7 world we live in.
Yeah.
So that's sets a whole tone. If you get a text message on a Friday night, a Saturday morning, if people respond, or there's a different, depending on who the client is or who the sender is, there's an expectation about when they should, what's a timely response. Do you wait till the Monday, or do you wait till? So it brings up a whole set of undefined territory about what's the timely response, and how quickly is what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and there's really no set rules on that.
Yeah, well, and Ken, when I work with my clients, that's part of our agreements. It's part of the thing that we work on the first day. I'm very clear. You will get a response from me within 48 hours.
48 hours. So
you know
set
what?
the
I mean, I'm very similar. I told my client, first of all, my bedtime is 10. I'm old dragon. I need my beauty sleep. So otherwise I can't think. 10 o'clock. All my clients know. If they send me something, even 1 minute past 10, that's no good. Tomorrow. Yep. So I normally tell them 24 hours or turnaround time.
Yes.
I'm much faster.
Yes.
I mean, once we finish the thing, I will call people back.
Yes.
But expectation is 24 hours return.
The agreement
is 24 hours. I told them up front. But that's why you set up expectation and agreement. So if you get back to them sooner, they think you leave up, you do better than they promised.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, they say, why didn't you call me? I mean, why?
That's right.
I have other clients. So
that just happened to me yesterday with a client. She sent me a message, and I had time, and she was working with something really difficult, and it was very timely. I said, "Do you want to jump on a call today? We have our call today."
Yeah.
I said, "Let's jump on the call today and handle this." And she was like, "Really?" Right?
Yeah.
So she knows the agreement is we're going to meet at our time,
hours,
but I've responded to her. She was like, "I wasn't expecting you to respond." She
Right.
wasn't expecting it, so she was delighted.
She had a pleasant expectation.
Yes.
Pleasant surprise.
Pleasant experience.
Right,
Yes.
right. All right, why don't we take a short break? We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back to our show. We're joined today by Jena Kinney, a certified life coach. So, Jena, let's continue where we left off just prior to the break.
Yeah. So we were talking about what happens when agreements aren't being met. And we were talking through it's an opportunity for another agreement to be made. Now, when I do that, I was giving the example of that employee that wasn't turning in the report on time. Right. It's really important for me to slow down and really think about, okay, what is it? Remember before we were talking about what complaints do I have? What's making me angry? And then what's the specific request? I have to slow down for a couple of moments just to get with what do I really need from this person? I really need this report by 5. I don't mind working a little bit in the evening. I'm not going to require it by noon because I know we have some other tight deadlines coming. And so I'm not going to require that. So does 5 work? I check internally. Yes, it does. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else that I need to be thinking about when I have this conversation so we can get that specificity, that granularity?
Right.
And then we go back and have the conversation. We get the agreement, check on the strength. Is that something I can count on? And I will usually ask if someone's broke the agreement, remember there's 3 questions. Is that something I can count on? What can I help to do to ensure this happens? And what might get in the way of getting this done? If someone's broken agreement with me before, I will ask them 2 of those follow-up questions to check the strength because I want them to understand this is really important to me. Without an agreement, we have nothing between us.
Right.
Yes.
And we implement that with our employees. We have a few admin people. And that's one of the things that Jane stresses and re-stresses time and time again, that we want accuracy, we want speed, and we want follow-up, but you have to have the accuracy first. You can't have the speed, but be sloppy. So everything you do, whether it be the written emails, the presentation of the contract, the offers, it has to all follow in the flow, but it has to be accurate. Everything has to be accurate, professionally done with a certain template. But that has to be. But you're right. And those agreements have to be revisited from time and time when things start to deviate, and you have to make it. You have to remind them. That's why in a corporate setting or any professional setting, you have weekly meetings or monthly meetings, because everyone's human. People, things tend to deviate, and you have to. That's what the purpose of the meetings are, to bring people together and say, what did we do good here? What did we do not so good here?
Absolutely.
And you have to reemphasize and reinforce what's good and what needs improvement, right? Whether it be in a professional setting, an athletic setting, a professional sports team, that's what they do. They look at the film. What did we do good? What did we do bad in this team?
That's right.
So that's something that we have those communication agreements with the employees, so they know what the expectations are for their work.
Now the agreements.
Yeah.
Now the agreements. No more expectations.
But they know. So they know. So their expect. But I mean, so they know so our expectation is similar to their expectation.
And they can put what they want as a part of the agreement.
That's
so
right.
With our client, the same thing, right? With the seller, always ask them, what do your expectations are from me? What do you expect me to do? And believe it or not, by asking that powerful, we had a trainer, so I was trained. I wasn't really come up myself.
Sure.
The trainer said you have to ask because the client may have a different expectation. For example, some seller will tell me, my expectation is worry-free because I'm always worried. Please hold my hands. But sometimes give me a pep talk. I had a client, she's holding very high position in HR. Very high position. So she is the person normally give a pep talk to her employee. But when I represent her selling her house and suddenly deal fell through, when I call her, she was a mess. Mm-hmm. I called her in the lunch break because I knew that time I could get through to her. And she cried. She said, oh my God, I couldn't believe. I cried with you. I couldn't believe. I said, you just overstressed. That's work together and go step by step, right? And then she was just saying, you caught my worst moment. Because, everybody have a different expectation. Her expectation was the deal will go through. Yeah. But sometimes it doesn't. Let's work out plan B. When it doesn't, let's have a plan B. I said, hey, I know you're upset. That's life. How do you know next deal would be better? So at the end, we did get a better deal, so she was happy. Good. But I said, you know what? Just don't be discouraged. Let's take a break and see what options we have.
Absolutely.
This is our plan, Yep.
And coming back to like the employees and even in this situation, Jane, that you were talking about, the whole conversation about having the agreement. And by the way, I never make agreements via text or via email. Mm-hmm. It is always a phone call. Yeah. Or an in-person conversation, right? I always incorporate, but I send them an email and they agreed. No. That was you telling them what to do, and they said yes, which is an expectation. Mm-hmm. It's an agreement in disguise. Excuse me, it's an expectation in disguise of an agreement.
Yes. Right.
It's not an agreement. It's me telling you what to do. And what did I say earlier? We rebel against that. Right. So we automatically don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whereas, and if I'm having problems with people in agreement, I want to really slow down, right? I want to ask them, so what is keeping you from coming, to your word on the agreements that we've made? And they might say, well, when I make that agreement with you, it's in good intention, and then this thing always happens, or these things always happen. That's more information for you about your business. It's more information for you about how things are operating. And it gives you an opportunity to help work with them to solve that challenge that they're dealing with. So this conversation about agreements opens up a whole other perspective and viewpoint sometimes that we wouldn't otherwise have, which I think is so great. Just like you were talking about with this seller, right? It's like we have to ask, like, what is it that you really want from me?
Yes.
As your agent.
Yes.
And and the answer will be different with every single person.
Some people smooth, some people I'm worried, some people I want the top dollar, some people, believe it or not, they want a nice people to enjoy home as much as they do,
Yes.
and some is a time frame. They build a new construction.
Yes.
They need meet
So
the
they
time.
want a flexible closing.
Yeah.
That's one.
Everybody's different. And you just mentioned don't text or email, right? I have another perfect example between the agent. The seller agent texts the buyer agent and say, can we leave some furniture stuff? We are in the, run short of time. Can we leave something, right? And a few items. And a buyer agent said, let me ask.
Mm-hmm.
Both thought they had
So they thought,
agreement.
and so the seller agent thought the silence meant they didn't say no, so
Yes.
that must mean
And
that
then
they're
you didn't get-
allowable.
you said you
And the
asked, you
buyer
didn't get back to me.
agent said, well, the interpretation is, well, she's saying, well, hey, I never agreed.
I
you
said
just
I
texted.
asked. I didn't get back. I mean,
So,
it means
so
we
there's
say
there's
no.
the ambiguity, and
Yeah.
everybody's going to interpret it on the side that best suits their defense to them.
Absolutely.
But that's a bad. That's
And
a,
the final
so-
walkthrough, there was a disaster. The seller left 2/3 of the house with the furniture, and the buyer is like, at the end, the seller agent said, I told you a few things. They said, yeah, you told me to show each other the phone. Few things. Is that a few things? It's so many
Right.
things.
And plus, they never agreed to
But
it.
exactly,
Yeah.
the buyer's agent said, I said I would ask, but you didn't get back to me. I thought you agreed. The buyer agent said, no, I didn't say yes means no.
Yes.
So
Right.
that was a big
And I
mess.
think the best thing to do, I'm very big on writing, everything in writing. I guess that's
But
my
you
law
have to
school
talk
training.
to
So the
people.
best thing would be to do is if they did
Yeah.
reach an agreement, would be to send an email to the agent, copy the attorneys, and say, "Dear Jane, as per our agreement. The seller is allowed to leave this items
Yeah.
These
behind,
items,
these items
Yeah.
behind, so that everybody's on the same page."
Yeah.
At the
You know-
final
you know-
walkthrough,
you know-
and
you
then
know
copy
what-
everybody on it. That's with one thing with email, with business, you copy everyone in the rest of the world. So
You know what I do
that's-
now?
so you-
Not only list it, right?
Yeah.
We have a picture. I want the seller send me everything, the picture. You can send that with the email now. Everything in writing. I said, we agreed,
Mm-hmm.
and this is we're going to leave free of charge, and this is the item, attached is the photo.
Yeah.
So there's never had a
But you're
issue
so
of final
true. It's
walkthrough.
such a learning experience. I can give you an example with landlord-tenant with the leases, where let's say a tenant has a single-family house, and part of the lease agreement states that the tenant shall cut the grass. So let's say it's a single-family house. So the tenant does their job; they cut the grass, but they don't address the shrubs, the weeds.
Right.
So when the landlord, and this has happened for a house that we inherited, that the expectation of the landlord was that when they got back was, oh, you're going to cut the grass, but I mean cut the grass, trim the shrubs, do the weeding, the fertilizer. But the grass was short, but it was full of crabgrass and weeds, and there were flower beds were
Costed
overgrown.
almost $3,000.
The branches were
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why in the addendums, that's for one example that we put in. Whatever the expectation is, we make sure it's spelled out in writing. The tenant shall cut the grass, trim the shrubs, do weed, ensure the weeding is done, snow is removed, ice is removed from the
Yes.
sidewalk in a
Yes.
timely manner. The branches are trimmed and kept away from whatever they want them to
Yeah.
do. So everything has to be in writing.
That's
because
right.
if there's any ambiguity, it's going to be a disaster.
And that's where you're getting into that step 2, right? It's like that specificity,
Yes.
right? Like
Specificity must
slowing
be-
down to really get specific about what it is that you're agreeing upon, what you're coming to a
Yes.
agreement on. So I think that's really a beautiful
that
example
was
of
a
that
good-
specificity.
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess we had another example that with certain things that no matter how comprehensive you make a lease and an addendum, there was an issue we had with plants, belongings, where a landlord had these plants that were gifted to them. They used to occupy the unit, but for whatever reason they decided they wanted the plants to stay with the unit because of sentimental reasons. They thought the plants were best suited there. So in the past historically, they had prior tenants, and all the prior tenants had agreed, and they nurtured the plants, and there was no issue until a recent tenant got them. And at the walkthrough, the landlord expressed to the tenant and verbally said, "Oh, these plants were gifted to me. I'm giving them to you to keep in the unit." But the tenant had a different mindset and different interpretation. They thought, oh, they're gifted to me, and even though they're beautiful, they don't suit our furniture. We're not plant people. We can't take care of them. So it turned into a problem because at the end of the tenancy, when the tenant vacated, the landlord, to their surprise, the plants were missing. So it caused
give it away.
so there's always anything, the specificity wasn't there, and that created. That created two different mindsets. There was no meeting of the minds, and
Absolutely.
so that's
Absolutely.
Yes.
I hope this has been helpful to
Yes.
understand the power of agreement
Yes,
and
yes.
how
Very
it can
much so.
change
Yeah, and how it
we're
applies
operating.
and how it applies to life and to
Yeah.
real estate and relationships, personal business relationships. Yes. So we're almost out of time, Jena, but I want you to please give your email and your phone number again. And
Yes.
yes.
Great. Thanks, Ken. It's Jena at jenakinney.com. That's JENA at JENAKINNEY.com or 201-978-3915.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to join us again this Sunday. It was very enlightening, and I think we really enjoyed it.
It was an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Have a great rest of the weekend. See you
Thank
next week.
Thank you.